Okay. I'm going to give you just a little glimpse into the futile reasoning of my corrupt heart. You all know that famous parable, the famous teaching that Jesus gave on about Judgment Day. And he's going to gather all of the peoples of all the nations together and separate them like a sheep from the goats. And the sheep are going to be on his right, and the goats on his left. Okay? So picture this. This is my futile and corrupt reason. It shows that I have completely forgotten whom I'm dealing with. Pretend like you're Jesus on Judgment Day. All right? So you are all Jesus sitting on your throne. Hold up your right hand. All of you hold up your right hand. Okay, so that's your right is my left, right? So I have thought before that on Judgment Day, just to make sure, when I see Jesus on the throne, I'm going to make sure I move through the crowd of all the people and work myself to the left as far as I can. Because, just in case, maybe he's not going to love me enough, or maybe I'm not going to have done enough, and I'll be in with the sheep, and if I happen to be a goat, maybe I'll slide in with the sheep anyway. Just a way to make sure that I'm going to be in the right place in heaven. Right? Can you think of anything more futile and corrupt than that? Like trying to out-sight God? You know, as though if I really was a goat, I could slide in with the sheep and nobody would know, and I'd be in heaven like, ooh, I don't belong here. But I slid in anyway because I knew it said he was on his right, and I got it, and I had enough sense to know to go. That is so corrupt. That is so wrong. There's something so wrong about that. It shows, and I think am I the only one that has thought that? I am in need of more help than I thought. It shows how quick we are to forget who it is that we're dealing with and what's actually going on. As though you could get lost in the crowd somehow. I think that one of the things that says to me is that you can't take this passage, even this passage, literalistically. As though there's going to be a huge crowd. Because, I mean, on Judgment Day, how long is it going to take to work your way through all of the peoples of all nations ever that have ever lived? And what happens if I'm like a mile and a half into the people on the right or the left? And I'd never have enough time, I don't think, to work my way through that whole crowd. I mean, even to think like that shows that you're missing the point. And you've forgotten what or who it is that we're dealing with. And I think a lot of times people think like that. I mean, they don't think like that about necessarily this parable, but they have that same kind of thinking in their mind. Like, I can outsight God. I can fool God somehow. I can get something from God that he wouldn't ordinarily give me. However you want to phrase that. People are, I think, all the time trying to think that way and act that way. So I want to look at this parable, this teaching about judgment. And a couple things, there's not very much background to this. This is the last teaching that Jesus gives before he goes to the cross. This is the last block of teaching. I don't know if you remember this. I'm sure most of you do. When we started in the Gospel of Matthew, there's 5 main blocks of teaching in Matthew that Jesus does. Matthew takes all of Jesus' teaching and arranges it in 5 big groups. This teaching of the parables is the last of the 5 groups. And this teaching that we had about the sheep and the goats is the last of the teachings of his teaching. So from now on in Matthew, he says a few things, but there's no more big blocks of teaching. He goes to the cross. In fact, look at chapter 26, verse 1. When Jesus had finished saying all these things, he said to his disciples, "As you know, the Passover is 2 days away, and the Son of Man will be handed over to be crucified." So this is the last thing that he says before he goes to Jerusalem to be facing crucifixion. So I think it behooves us to remember, particularly in this teaching, who it is that we're dealing with. Who is the person in this teaching about the sheep and the goats? In other words, who's the Son of Man? And the short answer is the Son of Man is Jesus himself. The Son of Man was Jesus' favorite title for himself. In Matthew 16, a few chapters earlier, Jesus is talking to his disciples, and he says, "Who do people say the Son of Man is?" And they say, well, some people say that he's John the Baptist, some people say he's this, that, the other thing. And then Jesus changes it just enough so that you get the point. He says, "But who do you say that I am?" And it's clear from that passage and from a number of passages that Jesus viewed himself as the Son of Man. Now, he was always trying to back off of that a little bit, because you don't want to create a ruckus before the ruckus's time has come, so to speak. So I think that's why he speaks oftentimes in that sort of almost mysterious way. Who do people say the Son of Man is? Okay, that's who they say. Okay, who do you say that I am? The Son of Man. It's a title that comes from the Old Testament lesson that we had read from the book of Daniel. The Son of Man figure started there, and the people of God knew that the Son of Man was going to come. He was going to be the ruler. He was going to be there forever and ever once he came. The Son of Man, the Messiah, the Christ. And Jesus is that person. He says in the beginning of this teaching, when the end has come, the Son of Man is going to be coming and sitting on his throne. So Jesus is the person in this parable. In this teaching, Jesus is the one who is gathering the nations. Okay, the second thing I think we have to note about this person, about who we're dealing with, is that not only is he the Son of Man, but he's the Son of Man who comes in his glory. He comes in the glory of God. When the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the angels with him. The glory of God is what he's talking about. Again, because of going back to that Daniel passage and a whole bunch of others, Jesus is the Son of Man who comes in the glory of God. Now think about that for a second. Think about the glory of the Rocky Mountains. How many of you have ever been to some place, it doesn't have to be the Rocky Mountains, but some place out in creation, where you've seen creation and you have felt glory? Anybody ever done that? You feel, in a sense, small because you're confronted with something so massive and so beautiful. So if you put all of that together, I saw a great picture the other day. You know, we just had an outburst I forget how long ago, of sun radiation, and when it hits Earth, it creates the aurora borealis. And there was a wonderful picture that was taken from the space station that showed the curvature of the Earth and all of these lights coming up from the Earth, the aurora borealis, when the sun hit it. And I just thought, you know, I saw that picture. I wasn't even seeing it in person. I saw the picture and I thought, glory, glory, that's glory. Imagine all of that, the glory of the creation. And think about oceans and waves and storms and hurricanes and the stars at night. Do you know that we just passed the vernal equinox? Does everybody know what that is? The spring equinox? I went out and did it this morning. On the 20th, for 2 days, on the 20th, the 21st, and the 22nd of March and of September. You go out and you look up and down an east-west road, and the sun rises directly in the east, right dead smack in the middle of the road. And at night, it sets directly in the west. And then because the earth is slowly... Why am I telling you all this? Glory. The glory of God. is revealed in his creation. And we're talking about the Son of Man coming in his glory. The glory of the Creator. The glory of the one who made all glories is going to come. And he's going to bring the angels with him, apparently. So on his heavenly throne, he comes in his glory, the Son of Man, namely Jesus Christ, and he gathers with his angels. So you can imagine the heavenly host. They're normally invisible. Maybe they will be visible. Maybe they won't. You don't want to press this literalistically too far. But he's gathered with his angels. The scene that Jesus is creating is just an awesome, almost incomprehensible scene. At the end of history, the Son of Man is going to come in his glory with his angels and sit on his throne. He's sitting because he's reigning. When the judge comes into the courtroom, the bailiff says, "All rise," and everybody stands up, and the judge walks over, and then when the judge sits down, it's time for court to begin. And that's what's happening here. The judge is coming at the end of history in all of his glory with all of his angels, and he's sitting on his throne as the king, as the judge. And he's gathered all nations and all peoples before him. Now, I don't know how you imagine that. It's beyond comprehension. That's one of the reasons why I think this is not, to be taken literalistically. I believe it's going to happen. But I don't think that we're going to be gathered in a huge field. In the first place, how many people, there's like 6 billion people on the earth now? And how many people have lived ever since the beginning of history? I mean, it's incomprehensible. And I think it's almost impossible to take literalistically. But the point is, when something is a metaphor for something, the something that it's a metaphor of is even greater. Does that make sense? The reason why you use an analogy or a metaphor is because the thing itself is so amazing, you can't describe it in any other way than to say it's like something. So this is Jesus, the Son of Man, coming at the end of history, gathering all the peoples before him for the great judgment. You and I will be there. It may not be in a field. You may not even be able to see the throne because you'll be so far away, 6 billion people away. But something like this will happen. And Jesus will be sitting on the throne as the reigning king and judge. Now, with that set up, what's the criteria? Because everybody wants to know, right? What's the criteria? How am I going to be judged? And in a word, the judgment comes in how compassionate and loving have we been. How compassionate and loving have we been? I'm just sticking to this parable. I'm just sticking to this teaching right now. And this teaching, Jesus says that when he gathers everybody together, the king is going to say to those on his right, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty," and so on. The criteria of judgment is how compassionate have you been to those in need. Now, a little side road. I know Marty Zeke always likes these, and so she's not here to hear this one. This little side road is this. This is not about us earning salvation. This is not about us making sure that I've fed enough people, that I've flipped enough pancakes for hungry people. See, that should put a goad in you to be there to volunteer for priceless pancakes. Because when you serve hungry people food, you're doing what the king wants. This is not about making sure that you flipped enough pancakes that the king is going to say, "Okay, you're good to come in." And he's not going to be saying to some people, "If you just had 5 more pancakes, you were this close. Get out of here." That's not what's happening here. This is not about earning your salvation. And I know that because the king says to those on his right, "Come, you who are blessed." And in Greek, the tense is a perfect tense. In other words, it means, "Come, you who began to be blessed at the foundation of the world," as it says, "and who continue to be blessed. You have been blessed by my Father." So this is not about us doing enough to make God love us or let us in. It's about God already having blessed the people who are on his right. And they are going to inherit a kingdom that has been prepared for them from the beginning of the earth, from the foundations of the world. So in other words, these people, before they had done anything about feeding anybody, they had already been blessed, and the kingdom had already been prepared for them. Now, aren't you glad that you don't know how many sheep and how many goats there are? We're never told in the scripture the numbers. Nobody can even guess. So this parable is also not about you thinking, if I just do enough, I can get in, but I'm not so sure about you, and I'm not so sure about you. This parable has nothing to do with that. There's no numbers given. There's no way to know. In fact, in the book of Revelation, which gives a different slant on this, it says that there was gathered before the throne of God people from every language and tongue and nation and people group that has ever been, that cannot be numbered. And they're all there singing praises to God. So if you're gonna go with numbers, go with the book of Revelation that says there's a group there that can't be numbered, that it's not possible to number. Now, human beings have numbered the human genome. We're good at numbering things. We have a census bureau, do we not? That someone actually here works in the Census Bureau. We are good at numbering things. And the book of Revelation tells us nobody can number this group. So if you're going to look at, who's in and who's out, think about the number that no one can number. That's what you should be thinking about. So this is not about earning your way into heaven. In fact, Paul says that the fulfillment of the law, the way to fulfill God's law, is to love your neighbor. Galatians 5:14. Look it up. The whole law is fulfilled in this one saying, love your neighbor as you love yourself. So you want to keep the law of God? Love your neighbor. That's the whole shebang. That's the whole kit and caboodle. Does anybody know where that comes from? Is that a World War I expression? You have a kit and there's caboodle in it? Or something like that. Anyway, that's the whole ball game. Loving your neighbor as you love yourself. Because, like I mentioned in the children's survey, and like Paul says in Acts 17, God doesn't need the stuff that we can give him. He already owns everything. What are you going to give him? What do you buy for the person who has everything on their birthday? He doesn't need what we have to give him, but he needs what we have to give one another. So that's what this whole thing is about. Also, I want to caution you to say that this is not an exhaustive list. Jesus says, I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty. I was a stranger and you invited me in. I needed clothes and you gave me clothes. I was sick and you looked after me. I was in prison and you came to visit me. This is not an exhaustive list that we can check off. Because how many of you have visited a prisoner in the last week or two? Not many. I didn't see any hands go up. The point is, this is not an exhaustive list. This is to be taken as people loving other people in a way that provides for their practical needs that they need. I had read a thing about one guy that said he had a mother in his congregation that used to feel guilty all the time. She had like 6 children. And she felt guilty because she couldn't go and feed hungry people. And she couldn't go to the inner city. I mean, she was too busy, with her family. And she said it finally dawned on her every time her children looked up at her and said, "I'm hungry," and she fed them, she was feeding Jesus, in a sense. So this is not about going overseas. This is not about going wherever you're going to go. This is about just taking care of people's needs around you that you see. Being a compassionate and loving person, because you can't out-psych God. Jesus is, like I started to say earlier, in chapter 26, verse 1. Jesus, having finished saying all these things, said to his disciples, "As you know, the Passover is 2 days away, and the Son of Man will be handed over to be crucified." In a few short days, Jesus is going to be hanging on the cross, thirsty. And there is one of the Gospels that says that one person offered him some vinegar to drink. Ooh, ooh, ooh. Jesus is going to be hungry. Jesus is going to be alone. Jesus is going to be naked. Jesus is going to be a prisoner. And nobody is going to be helping him. And he's doing it for us. He's doing it on our behalf. So that when we see what he's done for us, our response is to fall down and say, "Glory," and do whatever we can for the people around us. And I wanted to close with a good example of that. You all remember that it's been a couple weeks ago now that the ISIS group beheaded 20 Egyptian Christians in Libya. You probably saw the video, the guys in the orange jumpsuits by the Mediterranean Sea. I saw a thing the other day. They interviewed one of the guys who lost two brothers. In other words, two of the people that were in those orange jumpsuits that were beheaded were this one guy's brother. Christians. And they interviewed him on an Arabic Christian radio station, television station. You can see it on YouTube. You can see the interview. If you want to see it, I'll show it to you. And they're talking to this guy in the interview about, gee, all those Christians were killed, and two of them were your brothers. How does that make you feel? What did you think about that? And he says this. I'll just read it to you. Another forgiveness message was broadcast from our village, 150 miles south of Cairo, and home to 13 of the 21 Christian martyrs in Libya. Bashir Estefanos, who lost two brothers in the killing, was called by SATV7 and surprised everyone by giving thanks to ISIS. I feel like that little dog that was, the symbol for sitting in front of the big speaker, was it RCA? Going, what? He gave thanks to ISIS. 500,000 people have now listened to his testimony online. He says this, quote, "ISIS gave us way more than what we asked for," he told the host of the popular program. "They didn't edit out the part of the beheadings as their throats were cut, where they declared their faith in Jesus and called upon him to save them." And they said, now this is being seen all over the Arab world, all over the Muslim world. And people are seeing Christians, as they're being beheaded, calling upon Jesus. And he said it's having a great impact. As Stephanos prayed on air for God to save the killers from the ignorance they have been taught, and related a conversation with his 60-year-old mother, the mother of two of the people who were beheaded. If someone from ISIS was in their village right now, she said she would invite him into her home and talk with him and pray that God would open his eyes. Let's close in a word of prayer.